On a previous episode, we made some home fries, and in it I discussed boiling potatoes. We're going to look a little bit more at boiling potatoes today, because we're going to make ourselves some delicious mashed potatoes. My recipe for making mashed potatoes consists of butter, cream, sour cream, the potatoes themselves, and some salt and pepper. Now we're going to begin our process by peeling the potatoes. Now, one of the big things when it comes to making mashed potatoes versus boiled potatoes is the temperature of the water. When you're making boiled potatoes using cold water, adding the potatoes to them, and then boiling them is kind of the way you want to do it. But if you're making mashed potatoes, it's actually probably better to use hot water instead. So you boil the water first and then you add the potatoes in. Now this prevents the starch from kind of going crazy, because a lot of the times when you're making mashed potatoes, the starch can go crazy and then you have like glue going on. That can also happen if you over mash your mashed potatoes. Okay, so we finished peeling our potatoes, so now we can go over to the stove and get ready. So we're going to get ourselves a nice big pot, fill it with water most of the way up, and crank the heat on the stove. And this will be what we need. Now once your water is boiling, you can throw your potatoes in whole, full size, but they cook a lot faster and a lot more evenly if you cut them up first. So we're going to cut up our potatoes now. And you can do the air cut if you want with your paring knife, but I really don't recommend it. It's kind of tricky, it's kind of hard to get it to go through, and you're kind of cutting towards yourself. And it's for that reason that I recommend that you always cut with a cutting board. So I'm just going to grab myself a little cutting board here, and I'm going to finish cutting my potatoes into smaller, more manageable sizes. And now that our potatoes are all cut up, we can watch the footage of me dumping them into the water again and spilling the water all over the place. It's usually best to pour the potatoes in the opposite direction, away from yourself. That way you don't splash yourself with water. Or you put the potatoes in one at a time and just slowly drop them in. That way you don't spray water all over the place. Either way, now that we're in the water, we're going to let it cook for a while. So we're going to let this cook for about 10 to 15 minutes. And that should be enough time to get our potatoes tender. And just kind of give it a stir every now and then to make sure they don't stick to the bottom of the pan, because that can be a bit messy for cleanup. And as far as testing if the potatoes are ready, I use the old fork method. If you prick it with a fork and it comes out cleanly, like it just slips off, it's probably tender enough. Sometimes it takes a little while to get to that point, but that's the generally accepted way of testing if potatoes are boiled enough, as far as I know. Now that our potatoes are tender enough, we can take them off and drain them. Now I typically use the lid method. You put the lid on top of the pan and then you just dump it in the sink with the lid kind of holding the potatoes inside. You can also dump it into a sieve if you want, but sometimes that can be a little bit more messy. So I usually find this to be the preferred method for draining your potatoes. And now that the potatoes are sufficiently drained, we're going to put them back on the stove on a really low heat, just a minimum on the stove top, just to keep them kind of warm while we work with them. Okay, now that our potatoes are nice and hot and fresh on the stove, we're going to add our butter. Some people like to mix their butter in with their milk and kind of preheat it. The thermal mass of the potatoes, it's not really necessary unless your butter is frozen. And I'm using cream instead of milk because cream is better. And now we've got a bit of a mix going on. Toss the cream in. And then we'll just keep mashing and mixing this around. Although everything's all now mashed completely at this point. If you want it to be smoother than this, you need to use the electric mixer. But this is one of those things that if you over mix it, it can turn to glue. A little bit of salt here just for seasoning. Some people like to salt multiple times. They salt when they boil. They salt before they mash, and then they add salt, but I usually just add it in right near the end and just keep mixing it around, and then when I'll taste it with a little bit of a spoon there, and then I'll examine the properties of the solution. And if it needs more salt, crank in some more salt. Either way, don't go too salty on it because people like to have their individual preferences, and if they want to add salt to their potatoes later, that's fine, but you can always add salt, you can't take it away. Either way, there's our mashed potato solution. Now you can just get it into a bowl for serving. And of course, you're probably wondering, you had sour cream at the start of this. What are you going to do with that? I'll tell you. I'm just going to put the sour cream on the top of my potatoes as a little bit of a garnish. I think you do that at the end, and then you kind of have that thermal difference where you have the hot potatoes and the cool sour cream. And the mixture is a form of paradise. Just the way I like it. And then, of course, a couple cranks of salt and pepper on the top, and you're all set. Delicious mashed potatoes made easily in the convenience of your own home. Well, that's the end of this one. So let me know in the comments below if you make your potatoes using an electric mixer or you mash them by hand like I do. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.